I had been with the company for 15 years. 15 years of late nights, skipped lunches, impossible deadlines, and quietly fixing everyone else's messes. I'd worked under 5 different department heads, seen 2 CEOs come and go, and helped build half the company's internal systems from scratch. Most of the current team didn't even know that I'd been the one who trained their bosses. So when I got the calendar invite for a performance review with Mr. Bradford, the CEO, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't due for a review, but I figured maybe it was a project debrief or something they wanted me to help advise on. I was the person they came to when no one else had the answers. This would be no different. I wore my usual dark slacks and button-up blouse. Professional. Calm. Prepared. I brought a notebook, a pen, and a clear head. Bradford's assistant greeted me without eye contact and gestured toward the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. I walked the path I'd walked hundreds of times before, past the desks of new hires who didn't know my name, past the framed accolades I had indirectly helped the company achieve. When I stepped inside, Bradford didn't look up. He was sitting behind his desk, tapping at his laptop. The blinds were drawn. That wasn't normal. He finally raised his head and offered me a flat smile. Close the door. The air felt heavier instantly. I closed the door slowly, turning to face him. What's this about? He gestured to the chair across from him. Have a seat. I didn't. Not yet. Something about his tone made me stay standing. Bradford cleared his throat and reached for a slim folder on the desk. I'll get right to it. We've decided to make some structural changes. Your position is being eliminated. The words didn't land right away. They floated in the air between us, bizarre and out of place, like a joke told too flatly. I'm sorry, I asked, blinking. He placed the folder in front of him and slid it across the desk. It's nothing personal. We're restructuring. The company's moving in a new direction. You'll find your severance details inside. I stared at the folder but didn't touch it. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. Instead, there was a strange calmness washing over me, like the body goes numb before pain registers. You're letting me go, I said slowly, testing the words on my tongue. He nodded. Effective immediately. We'll need your badge and access cards before you leave today. You'll get your final paycheck by Friday. I had worked there longer than he had. I had trained the team that helped launch his first major initiative. I had sat beside him during early investor calls, taken notes, followed up on tasks he forgot. And now I was being dismissed like a temp. He leaned back in his chair, almost bored. You'll land on your feet, I'm sure. You're resourceful. I looked at the folder again, then back at him. You're sure this is your final decision? It is, he said without hesitation. The board supports the restructure. There was. Final. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. I placed it gently on the table next to the folder. His eyes flicked toward it, confused. What's that? Something for you to think about, I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, opened the door, and walked out. He had no idea what he'd just started. I didn't go home right away. After I walked out of Bradford's office, I returned to my desk with mechanical calm, moving through the familiar motions. Shutting down my computer, collecting my things, slipping personal files off the shared drive and onto my encrypted storage. No one said a word. A few people watched from their monitors, their eyes darting toward me and then away just as fast. The whispers would come later once I was gone. There would be quiet sympathy from the ones who knew me, awkward silence from the ones who didn't. 15 years and I was being erased like a typo in a memo. Bradford had given me a plain white envelope with a printout of the severance terms. 3 months of pay, a generic letter of reference, a politely worded NDA tucked at the bottom. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I had expected this, though I didn't know when or how it would come. He thought I would go quietly. He thought I had nothing. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 3 years, I had been preparing for this exact moment. It started when I noticed a pattern. I was moved off the projects I'd once led and reassigned to support roles. My name was dropped from presentations. New hires were being brought in at higher salaries, given budgets I had once fought tooth and nail for. Bradford began scheduling strategy meetings without me, even when the projects were ones I had initiated. I watched it all happen month by month, shift by shift. They were phasing me out. But they were doing it slowly, methodically, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. So I began documenting everything. At first it was just emails, memos I had written but others had signed off as theirs, files I had created that were sent to clients under someone else's name. Then I started backing up contracts, proposals, invoices. Comparing numbers, tracking changes, building a private archive of everything that passed through my desk. And there was a lot. Because while they'd been busy ignoring me, I had still been the one holding the threads together. The deeper I went, the more I found. Inconsistencies in quarterly reports. Overlapping budget approvals. Vendor payments that didn't match signed contracts. I wasn't even looking for dirt at first. I was just saving proof of my own work. But what I found went far beyond that. I discovered a pattern of poor decisions. Some careless, others bordering on fraudulent. And Bradford's name was on every single one. That's when the preparation turned into something more. I created a timeline. Labeled folders. Secure backups. I made copies of copies and locked them in offline drives. I didn't plan to use them. Not unless I had to. But Bradford made the choice for me the moment he slid that folder across the desk. And the flash drive I left him? That was just the first page of a very long story. He would open it expecting noise, panic, maybe a threat. But all it contained was a list. A quiet, precise index of every mistake they had made over the last 3 years. Labeled. Dated. Linked to corresponding documents. No commentary. No accusation. Just facts. The truth organized like an audit report. And that was more dangerous than any threat I could have written. Because I knew people would listen. I had been invisible for a long time. Overlooked. Forgotten. But I remembered everything. And now it was their turn to realize just how much that meant. The next morning I woke up at 6:30 just like I had for the last 15 years. My alarm went off. I got out of bed, showered, made coffee and sat at the small table in my kitchen staring out the window at a quiet street. Only this time I wasn't rushing to get dressed or beat traffic. There was no inbox full of urgent tasks waiting for me. No meetings to prepare for. I had been erased from their schedule. But they were about to be written into mine. With a second mug of coffee in hand, I sat down at my desk at home, clean, quiet, and already prepared for this phase. I opened my laptop, entered a password known only to me, and decrypted a folder named simply, Records. Inside were years of archived materials. Emails. Internal memos. Drafts of reports with metadata showing who really wrote them. Budget spreadsheets with mismatched totals. Meeting transcripts I'd recorded when things started to feel off. Notes on patterns I'd observed. Sudden vendor switches, bonuses approved off schedule, inflated expense reports. It wasn't criminal, yet. But it was sloppy. Negligent. And in the wrong hands it could shake the company. Bradford had no idea I had this. And I wasn't planning to use it for revenge. I didn't want to destroy the company I had helped build. But I did want something to be remembered. I started by listing contacts. Over the years I had built quiet, professional relationships with former executives, board members, high-level clients, and consultants who had since moved on to other companies. Many of them still respected me. Many of them had no idea I'd even left. I drafted a few polite messages. No bitterness. No drama. Just, I've recently parted ways with the company and wanted to stay in touch. I've been reflecting on some of our past work together and would love to reconnect. If you're available for a quick call, let me know. Simple. Subtle. Within an hour the responses began trickling in. People were curious. Surprised. One even wrote, "They let you go? That makes no sense. You were the backbone of that place." Exactly. By noon I had 3 virtual coffee chats scheduled for the week and an invitation to lunch with a former operations director. They wanted to know what had happened. They were all still connected, to current employees, to investors, to clients. And I knew that word would spread quickly. But I didn't stop there. Next, I sent a version of the same email to someone I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Angela King, a former board advisor who had always had a sharp eye and an even sharper memory. I knew if anyone would recognize the quiet significance of what I had attached, it was her. I sent her the exact same list Bradford had received on the flash drive. No explanation. No introduction. Just a note. "You should see this. You always said facts matter more than noise." That was all I needed to say. Angela had built her reputation on integrity. She opened that file, and I knew she would. It wouldn't just end at a private message or a curious phone call. she would act. I sat back in my chair, the hum of my computer quiet, steady. This wasn't revenge. It was strategy. Bradford had thought I would disappear quietly, maybe take a few weeks off, start over somewhere else. He assumed I had no leverage. But I wasn't starting over. I was already 10 moves ahead. And I was just getting started. By Thursday, less than 4 days after I walked out of the building for the last time, the silence began to crack. The first indication came from someone I hadn't expected, Brian Marshall, the former CFO. He had left the company a year ago under the guise of early retirement, though rumors suggested otherwise. I hadn't spoken to him since his farewell dinner, but at 9:17 that morning I received an email. Subject: what exactly is going on over there? Emma. Just saw something I think you may have sent. Let me know when you're free to talk. I have a feeling this story runs deeper. I smiled because I knew what he was referring to. Angela King had opened the document. And she had shared it. Angela didn't play games. She moved with intention. If she had sent that file to Brian, then it meant the board was already talking. Quietly. Strategically. The company wouldn't know it yet, but they were being examined from the inside. By noon I had 4 back-to-back calls, each one starting with polite concern, followed by veiled curiosity and then cautious interest. Everyone wanted to know, why now? I never answered directly. I said only what I had to. They ended my contract suddenly without cause. But I think it's important that the people who care about this company know what's really been happening behind closed doors. It wasn't a confession. It was a mirror. And the people I was speaking to? They were smart enough to look closely. At 3:41 p.m. I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered on the 3rd ring. Emma. It's Sophie Langley from the Investor Advisory Group. Sophie had once championed the company during a Series C round. She was highly respected, sharp, no-nonsense, and rarely involved in day-to-day operations. If she was calling me, it wasn't casual. We've received some concerning information, she said. It seems to originate from your name. Would you be open to a confidential discussion? Yes, I said calmly. I'd prefer it that way. We scheduled a meeting for Friday afternoon. After the call, I sat in silence for a moment, taking in what had just happened. I had gone from invisible to indispensable in less than a week. Not because I shouted or threatened, but because I had taken my time. I had collected truth. And now I was placing it, piece by piece, into the right hands. I could imagine Bradford still sitting comfortably in his glass office, oblivious to what was circling around him. Maybe he was even celebrating, thinking he'd finally cleared the path for his chosen replacements. Maybe he was telling HR that I left peacefully, that the transition had been smooth. He would find out soon enough. I opened my laptop again and drafted one final message. This one went to a journalist. A quiet, methodical investigative writer from an industry blog that executives actually read. She wasn't mainstream, but she was respected. I didn't send her documents. Not yet. I sent her breadcrumbs. You may want to ask about the discrepancies between Q2 and Q3 vendor payments for Wexler Group Incorporated. Follow the approval trail. There's more than just inflation happening there. No name. No signature. Just a lead. I closed my laptop and leaned back. Bradford had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated a woman who had spent 15 years watching, listening, building the foundation of the company he thought he controlled. Now that foundation was shifting. And I was the one guiding the fault lines. Friday morning started with a voicemail from Human Resources. The tone was cheerful, but the message was rehearsed. Hi Emma, this is Kendra from HR. We just wanted to check in and make sure you didn't have any questions regarding your severance package. Also, Mr. Bradford asked that I pass along his best wishes and appreciation for your years of service. If you'd like to finalize everything by end of day, we'd really appreciate it. I replayed it once, listening to every carefully measured word. They weren't checking in. They were testing the waters. Because by now they knew something was happening. And Bradford? He was trying to contain the fire, without acknowledging that the smoke had started at his feet. I didn't call back. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and reviewed the call notes from yesterday's conversations. For people from 4 corners of the company's legacy had reached out. Each of them held a different piece of the puzzle. They had all left for different reasons: disillusionment, burnout, quiet ousting. But now they were curious, alert, watching. At 2 p.m., I joined a confidential video call with Sophie Langley from the Investor Advisory Group. Her background was blurred, but her posture was crisp. She greeted me with direct eye contact in a tone that wasted no time. "Emma, thank you for speaking with me. I want you to know this call is off the record, and nothing you say here will be disclosed unless you give explicit consent." "I understand," I said. "What you sent Angela, it wasn't a warning. It was a dossier. I wanted people to see the full picture. And it worked." Sophie clicked something on her end, then continued. "We've launched a preliminary internal review. Quietly. If you're willing, we'd like to walk through some of the flagged items with you. Specifically, vendor contracts, budget anomalies, and chain of approval trails." I nodded once. "I have all of it documented." The next hour was clinical. Focused. We went line by line through inconsistencies I had been collecting for years. Overlapping invoices, inflated travel expenses, questionable bonuses, and one particular vendor that seemed to be receiving payments for services never delivered. When we finished, Sophie leaned back in her chair. "You were invisible to them. And they thought that meant irrelevant." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She continued. "If even half of this holds up under compliance, this won't just be a restructure. This will be a full audit." And there was the word Bradford feared the most. Audit. Because an audit didn't just expose systems. It exposed people. At 4:36 p.m., just hours after the call, I received an email. Subject: Urgent. Executive access request. It was from Bradford's assistant. The message was short and vague. "Emma, Mr. Bradford was hoping you might be available for a quick call regarding a few final details before closing out your file. He'd appreciate a few minutes of your time." I stared at the screen for a long moment. He knew. He didn't know how much. He didn't know who was behind it. But he knew I hadn't gone quietly. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank document and titled it, Exit Debrief. I began writing, calm, factual, complete. Not for drama. Not for retaliation. For record. I wanted a clean trail. Because what came next wouldn't be whispers or side conversations. It would be the point of no return. And I would be ready. By Monday morning, the shift had gone from invisible to undeniable. The office where I had worked for 15 years, the place that had silenced me then discarded me, was no longer stable. From the outside, it might have looked the same. People arriving with coffee cups, meetings on the calendar, the usual click of keyboards and chatter in the halls. But underneath, everything was trembling. At 9:03 a.m., an internal memo was leaked to a small network of former employees. I received it through a secure email chain. Subject: Interim Financial Review, Q2, Q3. The wording was vague, careful. The executive team was conducting an internal assessment of spending structures and vendor relationships. But the people reading it knew the truth. Someone had pulled the fire alarm. And I knew exactly who had handed them the matches. At 10:16 a.m., I received a LinkedIn message from Corey Tan, the Director of Product Development. "Emma, did you know they just froze 3 contracts this morning? Legal is swamped. People are freaking out. Someone from the board is here." Bradford had likely spent the weekend trying to trace the leak, calling in favors, trying to regain control. But it was already too late. As I had played the long game. This wasn't about making noise. It was about planting truth in places where noise couldn't drown it out. I had sent files to people with nothing to gain and everything to protect. People who had been mistreated or silenced just like me. People who now had a reason to speak. And one of them had finally tipped the balance. At 11:52 a.m., I received a text from Angela King. "Emma, it's happening. We're calling an emergency board session. Do not respond to any contact from Bradford or his team. You're protected." It hit me then, not as a thrill or a rush but a quiet confirmation. The woman they thought they could erase was now the reason the company's leadership was being investigated. By early afternoon, the company's intranet had gone into restricted mode. Employee forums were locked. Department access was tightened. Executives were called into a string of closed-door meetings. At 3:17 p.m., the company's public social media posted a bland, upbeat announcement. "Exciting changes are ahead as we begin a comprehensive internal review to strengthen our future." A sentence that said nothing but meant everything. I opened my email again. In the inbox sat a second message from Bradford's assistant, this one more frantic than the last. Emma, Mr. Bradford would still like to speak with you. He's concerned there may have been some misunderstandings. He hopes to clear the air. No more confidence. No more formality. Just desperation wrapped in politeness. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He had made his choice when he slid that severance folder across the desk and didn't even look me in the eye. Now he could live with the consequences. And I would continue doing exactly what I'd done for 15 years. Working quietly. Watching carefully. And making sure the right things got done, even if someone else took the credit. Only this time, the credit and the power were finally mine. By Tuesday morning, the damage was no longer contained. The board meeting the night before had ended without resolution. 3 executives had left the building without saying a word to anyone. Their cars were gone before sunrise. No one had seen Bradford since Monday afternoon. I knew because I was still connected to the people who paid attention. Corey messaged again. Bradford didn't show up today. His office is locked. Legal is taking over. It was happening faster than even I expected. For years I had felt like a ghost in that company. The one who built everything in the background while others smiled for the spotlight. I knew the culture. I knew who moved the real pieces behind the curtain. And I knew who would panic first when it all fell apart. And now I could see it, not just panic but resignation. I received an encrypted email from Sophie Langley at 9:44 a.m. Subject: confirmed. Transition phase initiated. Emma. Following our call, the board has voted to begin formal leadership restructuring. Bradford has been placed on administrative leave. A third-party audit firm is conducting a full review of vendor and finance practices. We've also recommended a cultural reset initiative. You are not named in any internal communications. If you wish to remain anonymous, that will be respected. But if you would consider consulting during the transition process, we'd be honored to bring you in. Confidentially or not, your choice. I stared at the message, reading it twice. Then a third time. Bradford was out. The company wasn't falling, it was changing. And they wanted me to help rebuild it. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the quiet street where I had taken that first sip of tea on my first morning without a job. What would I gain from going back? Recognition? Control? Closure? Maybe. But more importantly, it would mean I had done what no one expected. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't sued. I hadn't demanded attention. I had stayed quiet. Smart. Steady. And that's what made them come to me. At 10:15 a.m. I replied, "Thank you for your message. I'd be willing to consult on a limited short-term basis. Privately at first. Let's start with a conversation." I hit send. And then I closed the laptop, made another cup of tea and sat in the same spot by the window. 15 years ago I was hired as a temp with no nameplate and no voice. Yesterday I was a forgotten employee with a severance folder. Today I was the one they called when everything else failed. And I hadn't even raised my voice. 3 weeks later, I walked into the same building I had exited in silence not long ago. The lobby looked the same. Polished tile floors, minimalist furniture, the dull hum of fluorescent lights above. But everything felt different now. There was a nervous energy in the air, like the company was holding its breath. The receptionist, a new face I didn't recognize, greeted me without recognition. That was fine. I wasn't here for greetings. I was here because the board had requested a closed-door strategy session with their new consulting advisor. Me. The glass doors to the executive wing opened automatically when I swiped the temporary badge they'd mailed to my home. The irony wasn't lost on me. Once I needed someone's approval to step beyond these doors. Now I walked through them with authority. I didn't take the seat at the far end of the table, the one Bradford used to claim as his throne. I sat in the middle, calm and prepared as the board members filed in one by one. Sophie Langley was the last to enter. She gave me a subtle nod, then called the session to order. There was no posturing. No wasted time. These people were here to listen. I had already provided the documents. The evidence. The analysis. Now they wanted a plan. So I gave them one. A restructure that focused on transparency. A vendor verification system. A multi-stage review process for executive expenses. A communications protocol that gave every team member, from intern to senior manager, A secure channel to report abuse, oversight, or fraud. And then I made my final recommendation. I believe the company needs a cultural reset, I said, meeting every eye around the table. You can replace people, yes. But if you don't change how the structure rewards silence and punishes truth, you'll end up right back here again in 2 years. There was a long pause. Then Sophie spoke. And who do you suggest to help implement that? I didn't blink. Me. For as long as it takes. They voted unanimously. When the meeting adjourned, I walked back to the elevator and hit the button for the lobby. As I waited, I glanced at the hallway to my left. Bradford's office was dark. The blinds were shut. The nameplate was gone. A quiet erasure. No drama. No announcement. Just absence. The way he had once treated mine. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, but before they closed, I turned back for one final look at the corridor where I'd spent a decade and a half building something that others had claimed as their own. Not anymore. Because now my work had a name. A face. A voice. And this time they would remember it. I walked out into the sunlight, the wind cool against my face, and smiled. It hadn't been about revenge. It had been about restoring value, to my work, to my voice, to my worth. And I had done it not by burning everything down, but by showing them who really built it.